Hi, everybody. I am Sarabeth Berk, and I am so glad to be here today for this session of Becoming More Than Your Title. I've become a researcher of hybrid professional identity, and I study hybrid professionals in the workforce because I believe wholeheartedly people are more than experts and generalists. We need experts in the workforce and we need people who can do a lot of things. But there's a third group that we haven't talked about and we desperately need to, and those are hybrid professionals. And the reason hybrids are such an interesting and missing piece of the puzzle of the workforce is that hybrid professionals have many identities, but they're integrating and working at the intersection of those. So generalists might wear a lot of hats, but they don't connect them, and hybrid professionals are. So when you are at the intersection, you're doing things other people don't know how to do. You defy categorization and labels. So that's why I love having these different conversations, because I bring professionals on screen with me to talk about how do they experience their hybridity? What does that look like and feel like? And I speak to people across all industries, from finance and financial planning to physical therapy. And today I'm thrilled to have Faisal with me. He is a hybrid artist, and I haven't quite gone into that zone of hybridity before. So we'll hear about what he does with his art making, what practices he's combining. There's a lot of digital transformation and convergence between physical and real life experiences and the digital world. I kind of said that twice. One of his projects is called TweetGarden, and it was an immersive project. So we're going to ask him about what that was and how he designed it. But this whole philosophy of being more than your job title and how do you describe what you do is really what these conversations are about. So I'm going to bring Faisal up and we will get started. Hello, Faisal. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you.
Of course. Tell us where we find you today.
Well, I'm in Toronto right now in my studio.
It's wonderful. And I know you go back and forth between Canada and Pakistan. Is that right?
That's right. I was born and raised in Pakistan, and I moved here back in 2003. Yeah.
Amazing. I love that. Well, let's get started to learn more about who you are. And I love to start with the question, what do you do? How do you answer that, Faisal?
Yeah, that's the tricky one, right?
Yes.
Well, I believe I'm a hybrid professional, and been working for the past 2 decades in the intersection of art, and design-led innovation, and working with the creative technologies, and consistently sort of experimenting with forms and the mediums. Yeah.
Yes, experimentation, I think, is a big part of hybridity because you're crossing boundaries and borders. So you're creating things that didn't exist. I want to trace back your history a little bit because in your LinkedIn, you call yourself a hybrid artist, and in the bio of your website. But when did you start calling yourself that, and where did that even come from? Can you tell us how you ended up calling yourself a hybrid artist?
Yeah. Well, I would actually go a little back in my journey. I think it all started when I was just studying in Pakistan at National College of Arts in Lahore. And I think going back and looking at how the industry was evolved at that time, and looking into where I was studying a design degree, but I was constantly passionate about so many other things, right? So I spent more time in fine arts department. I was doing more theater. I was doing more puppetry. I was experimenting with non-linear, non-static design, even in that time, not knowing the fact that this is what this it will come down to it, what we are talking today, hybrid or hybrid professional. So I think I can reflect back to this when I was studying in back in the day, and I think it's, to me, it's sort of it's a personality trait, right? I think I was like that when I was even studying and in my earlier profession. I remember I my first job was with the ad agency in Lahore, and after 3 days, I quit the job because I realized this is not the space for me, and I think that sort of pushed this whole idea of experimentation. I'm always a curious person who's looking into these various ways to experiment with the form and the mediums.
Yes. So what did you notice about that job with the ad agency that you quit so quickly?
Well, I think I felt, um, I mean, I felt very boring,
Okay.
because, you have a very rigid and um, very sort of rigid protocol and policies
Yeah.
around how, the whole idea of working for a client and looking into the brief and how it's getting to you, who is giving to you, the scope of the work, all that in 3 days, I realized it's going to be very boring. It's going to be very repetitive,
Yeah.
and that was the trigger point for me just to say, hey,
Yeah.
that's me.
No, I hear that quite often. The reason I asked is when you realize, and maybe you did or didn't know at that time, but hybrid professionals, when they choose a line of work or a job that puts them into a box and gets narrow, the hybridity gets squished, right? You can't be the hybrid, and that is uncomfortable. And hybrids don't stay very long in those roles. For you, is 3 days. So that's impressive. I want to rewind a little bit back to your time in art school. You and I have both attended art schools and have art degrees, but I think back in the day when I was studying, I heard the terms more of like multimedia artist or multidisciplinary artist, and I was taking all different classes and different types of art like you were. So were you playing in that space as well, or tell me about this terminology, right, and what you used to call yourself, and then how you became the hybrid.
Yeah, well, this is interesting. We have so many terms in our life, right? The multimedia, new media, transmedia, non-linear, sort of, and then now, and I was consistently sort of pushing myself into these terms, right?
Yeah.
And I remember back in the day, the term multimedia was the first, if I recall it, because of the earlier, I think, evolution which was happening. I think at that time it was Macromedia Director as a software which came out, and it offers us to create these interactive, non-linear sort of DVD authoring back in
Mm,
the day. And I think that perception changed a lot of things, because we moved from a static image to a moving image, and the moving image kind of leads us to this idea of, oh, okay, this is a multimedia kind of framework,
yes.
right?
Yeah, I even remember the term mixed media. I called myself a mixed media artist for many years because I would combine collage with painting, with drawing, with, I don't know, paper art. And I was just doing weird things. I was like, I'm mixing things together. So eventually, though, you get to this space of hybrid, right? And so tell me how you define being a hybrid artist. You mentioned in the intro when I asked you what you do, you work at the intersection of, I'm going to have to remember, you're going to have to help me. Tell me the intersections again.
Yeah, the intersection of art, design led, and emerging technologies.
perfect. And that way you even explained it is something I coach people to do is you're a hybrid professional and you work at the intersection of these three things. But what does it mean when you're at those intersections? Can you talk about that? What is that intersectionality for you?
Well, it's sometimes I feel I facilitate conversation. Sometimes I feel I'm a connector.
Mhm.
Sometimes I feel I lead the conversation. Sometimes um, it falls into this really sort of interesting space where I feel I'm very comfortable, but sometimes the people I'm working with or collaborating um, gets very scared and nervous because um, they have a different perception. They are coming with their boxes and their perceptions of their understanding about their expert knowledge about things. So when I kind of work with them or collaborate with them, it gets quite interesting challenge, I would say. I
Yeah.
remember, I remember my friends still don't know what to call me even till now. My in-laws always talk about, well, he's doing something with computers, and but that being said, I think this to me is it as they say, the role comes with the responsibility sometime, and I feel the more I'm collaborating, the more I'm putting myself out there with my insights of the ideation, the process, the creation of the work, the production side of work, and how these we can work with each other, sort of give them this sort of comfort zone to have at least have a conversation that okay, well, okay, he can do the ideation process, he can manage the teams as well, he can come up with the experience of things as well, and he can also prototype things, he can also
Right.
design things. So it from that perspective, I think it's a shift which I see now happening, but it's still a long way to go.
Oh my gosh. The way that you were trying to describe what happens in your intersections really pointed to the fact that it's hard to describe, right? It is messy and it's hard to just put into like a simple definition. And I loved what you said about the people that you collaborate with feel challenged. You're comfortable in the intersectional space between identities, but other people don't quite understand it. And we have work to do. So when I talk with people about the hybridity and what it looks like and feels like, I think it's easiest for people to talk about an example of something they've done because by default, the things you're creating are representative of your hybrid nature, hybrid identity. So,
Yeah.
could you tell us about one of your projects? The one on my mind is TweetGarden, because that struck me as sort of a hybrid term. But if there's another project that you think shows your hybridity better, tell us about one of these artworks you've made and why it's hybrid.
Absolutely. I can talk about TweetGarden as well, but before that, one work which I'm doing recently, which I think is pretty interesting. So back in 2019, I was invited in Brazil for an art residency, and our idea was so we were about 16 artists, four curators, and about six, seven scientists. We are all living together, and we lived for about 2 weeks in rainforest. And the idea of the residency was to bring in artists and curators and researchers to really understand the climate impact which is going on in rainforest. So, and that was to begin with was very fascinating for me
Mm,
because there are these different types of professionals coming together and staying 2 weeks in rainforest, right? So it's extreme climate, it's extreme warm, and we learned through the lens of the scientific communities, to understand how it's actually happening on ground, what type
Mm.
of acts are happening on ground, how the indigenous communities are affecting by this.
Yes.
And that actually lead to a work which I'm developing now, and I'm calling it Seek. Seek
Mm.
is a interactive, immersive environment which is collaborating with the scientific community, and we are
Okay.
looking at 20 years of old data which they are accumulating, and we're looking into the impact of birds migration in North America, going from the North America to the Brazil. So so that journey actually evolved into this project, and now I'm sort of really collaborating with 16 scientists across North America,
Wow.
and looking at their data points and looking at the gaps in their data points,
Mm.
looking at how I can really help them to look at their work from a different perspective.
Yeah.
What type of new questions may come out of it? What type of gaps which they can identify from those gaps? And another thing which I felt, if we retrospect the climate crisis, and if we look at the world problems which still are there, and no, it's getting better, but still we have lot work to do. And so what my hope is with this work is not only facilitate the scientific communities to understand or look at a different perception with their data, with their research, but also make it accessible for the audience, like children's and diverse communities, who can really try to find their relevance in the ecosystem, how they are becoming part of the problem, and how
Mm.
they are contributing, and or how they can actually help to facilitate that conversation in a different level. So yeah, so this work is happening, so to speak. And going back to the Tweet Garden, I'm kind of doing this series of work where I'm looking at architectural spaces and gardens
Mm.
to reimagine the elements in the nature. So
Wow.
the Tweet Garden was, I started working on it, I think 2009 onwards, and that was that's it's an animated tree which works in different time zones,
Huh.
and it grew with audience wishes and prayers.
Wow.
So when you share your tweet or you share your SMS message, that actually converts into a leaf, and each leaf hold your memory or your wish.
Oh my
So
gosh.
in collaboration between different time zones, you actually create a garden which is responsive.
Okay, that is so hybrid. That's amazing. I'm trying to put all these pieces together just to articulate it for the audience. I mean, you really are a boundary spanner. There's so much cross mixture, experimentation, collaboration between the science, the data, the immersion, the design-led details, the artistry, the visualization. The list is so long because there aren't enough words to really express what the heck you're doing.
Yeah, and it's sometimes very difficult to explain everything as well, right?
I
Because
know.
it touches so many levels.
That's when it blows people's minds. I mean, it really, the intersectional space defies language. It just does. We cannot express enough labels and categories when you're in the hybrid space, which is the paradox of all of this. You're beyond, and Thank you so much for sharing those two examples of working in, I think, Brazil with the scientists to do that work. I think you called it Seek. Is that the name of that project?
Yes.
And then TweetGarden, because this is exactly how I've been instilling in people that if you're trying to express your hybridity, you've got to give an example. You have to tell a story of what you're doing and what it looks like, because then people can start to wrap their head around who the heck is Faisal, the hybrid artist, or Sarabeth, the hybrid, creative disruptor. It is about the stories and the work because we can't see it in ourselves. It's so complex.
Yeah.
Wow. That is fascinating, Faisal. So, how are you able to convey what you do? We had talked earlier, as a hybrid artist, you've got to work with museums and galleries and I don't know, buyers and stairs, and they don't really know who you are. You kind of mentioned that earlier. So, what are some of the tools that you've used to help them understand you better?
Well, I think it's a constant journey. In Urdu, we say tapasya, which is a struggle, which means
Mhm.
struggle in many ways, and it is a good struggle. It's not a bad struggle because I love what I do, and I think the example of Amazon is one strategy which is really helping me out, because when you find your purpose, when you find your role as an artist, I think that drives that energy, and then
Yes,
you need to be in that space to flourish it. And I think so the more I experiment, the more I'm accessible to others. It's helping me to establish these collaborations and these
mhm,
relationships. And for me, the hybridity has the most important component, in my opinion, is a collaboration.
yes,
Stepping out from your comfort zone
mhm,
and looking at different perception and different opinion and what actually that means. And so I'm what my strategies is so far is to be available, to put myself into these vulnerable positions, these
yeah,
vulnerable situations, and let the conversation go. And
yeah,
I this is exactly what happens as an artist, as a designer, when we share our concepts, when we share our ideas, when we share our different perceptions. That leads a conversation, and that sort of leads itself to a meaningful collaboration like Seek, right? It
yes,
started with 2 weeks sort of journey and spending time in rainforest, and now there are about 16 scientists who are really interested
mm,
in and believing in the fact that there are these gaps exist, there are these problems. They're recognizing the fact that, hey, they're doing a great job in data collection, but not really a good job in telling those stories. So I
yes.
think it's putting myself into these positions are actually helping me a lot.
I would say the most hybridized people I've met in their careers, they find resonance when people can experience them and work with them and to your point, collaborate, because no one really can understand you just from your bio and your website. There is an experiential side of seeing the hybridity in action and feeling it. Then it sort of makes sense and comes to life. And I just want to point out, Anika has been watching, and she said she was part of one of your tweet gardens for the BNU at UMass, and they were amazing, is what she said. So
Yeah,
kudos to
I
that.
love Anika. Yeah, hey Anika.
I want to experience a tweet garden. Are there videos or any way that we can see it
Yeah,
better?
yeah. There are videos. There's a documentation available,
Okay,
and yeah,
awesome. Um, Yeah, this collaborative element of showing people and pushing them beyond their comfort. I liked that comment you made because I think the hybrid space is uncomfortable, and you've mentioned that, and there's a struggle and there's a challenge there, especially people that are not familiar or know how to enter into hybridity. Maybe they're more of an expert or just someone who wears a lot of hats. And so you are really facilitating and taking people into that unknown space, right? That's the hybrid. Have you noticed any things like if we were giving people tips, ways to make that work well, or things people shouldn't do? Do you have any suggestions for the do's and the don'ts of working with, I'll say, non-hybrids when you're a hybrid professional?
Well, I don't know if it's a easy answer to
Probably
this
not.
question.
That's
Easy
what I research.
question. Yes, it changes so much, right? It changes so much, and I would, although, look at a perspective of um, knowing where the industries are going, and I think that potentially can bring some tips in that context, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if we look at the innovation in computing, if we look at the innovation in how we are, it's not about technology anymore, it's about experience. And if we look at these different disciplines which are merging now, from academia, I think it's we start looking at those possibilities as well. One thing which I noticed, and I learned by doing so many experimentation, is what is the right way to approach it,
yeah.
is to be very open with what you do. And
Mm,
that's the toughest part as well, because it's an anxiety, it's that vulnerable position where you have to put yourself in, right? And it's not easy, because how when you're sitting on a table with a team who are only focusing on one outcome,
yeah,
it's not easy for them to relate with it, right? So be open to the audience, and be very respectful as well, because I think, um, when I look at how we can collaborate, it becomes a kind of, um, uh, a responsibility, I
yeah.
guess, in many ways, to not put people and your collaborators in a very vulnerable, challenging space,
Right.
because we want to get that positive energy between
Mhm.
us. And I think positive energy, be open, and be very respectful to people who you're working with. These are the three tips I would give.
I think those are spot on. I love what you say about the respectfulness because I do think it's not about hierarchy. It's not experts are better than hybrids or better than generalists. It's none of that. It's the shared experience, right? It's everyone's voice matters at the table. And the role I think that you're explaining in your hybridity, at least, is to help facilitate more of that understanding and openness, which is the vulnerable space. And that's always hard, right? It's psychological safety, it's group safety, but seeing how people can expand beyond their typical lens or their one focus is such a gift. And I want to bring up this quote. Anika actually just wrote a comment that I think is pretty profound. So thank you for sharing this, Anika. She says, the recognition and use of these silent niches that are voiceless between disciplines is so amazing to be in. And collaboration is the keystone, but then it takes immense energy to grow the connections. What I'm hearing here, and then Faisal, I'm curious what that makes you reflect about, is having someone like, first of all, we need to realize hybrid professionals exist. They are kind of another element of workers, and they are playing a role that's bringing voice to these silent connections, that is helping open between boundaries and disciplines where people don't even realize there are boundaries of disciplines. So I love what you just brought up, Anika. Faisal, does that ring any bells with you?
Yeah, totally. This is spot on, right? It's a spot on, and as I was telling earlier, and using the word tapasya in Urdu, which means constant struggle. It's
Mhm.
it's a very slow process, and it needs consistent. sort of framework. You just can't let it go
Yeah.
on the way, because the moment you let it go, what my experience is that the people you're collaborating with goes back to their boxes,
Yeah.
and then and then so yes, it requires a lot of time
Yes.
grow. And once you see you know, this is what happens with the when we start looking at visually what's going on, right?
Mm.
People generally have little more respect for someone like a hybrid professional, when they start believing, and seeing is believing in many ways. When you
Yes.
see what's going on, it changes completely their perception.
Completely. I get this question a lot, so I'm going to throw it to you just because you have such a kind of high operating sense of hybridity. Some people have said, Sarah Beth, isn't everyone a hybrid professional? And I push back. I don't believe that to be the case. I do think people kind of land in singularity, multiplicity, or hybridity of their identity. What are your thoughts if someone were to ask you that and say, hybrid isn't, or Faisal, isn't everyone a hybrid? What would you say?
I will disagree as well with this model. Yes, people, like, generally everybody is doing multitasking, and multitasking is in many ways is not a hybrid sort of space, right?
Right.
And 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 I think, as I said earlier, um, it also, it's a personality trait as well. Sometimes um, at the core of it,
Mm,
people are hybrid in there. And that's if you go into villages and remote areas, you see these amazing people who are um, doing so many things with the different hats on. I think there is a certain core value which we sometimes have, and it doesn't matter what medium and what industries you're working with.
yeah.
But as a definition, I think it's not everyone is a hybrid professional, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's challenging. I keep trying to put more structure around it to expand why they aren't. One quality I think too of hybridity is the amount of disparateness.
Hmm.
So I think people that are generalists might have a little bit more similarity of like, doing some marketing, but then also some communication and storytelling. Like there's similarity of those veins of work. But a hybrid, someone who's highly hybridized, kind of in the vein of you, is going from the science arena to data into high-end art making and digital transformation. And those disciplines are very different. They're almost opposite in some ways. So there's greater tension of compatibility. That's just one of my thoughts on that. I want to respect how much time we have and all the stories you've been sharing. So to wrap this up, my last question, Faisal, is just around evolution, because you've hinted on that a couple times, changing language and words, going from mixed media into trans media and now into the hybridity. Is your sense things are going to keep evolving? Is there like a level beyond hybridity, or do you feel like hybridity is just so rich, you're going to be in this space? Like, what does that evolution of your hybridity mean, or what do you think is next?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to evolve more. um, if we retrospectively look at past 20 years,
Mm,
I think each term stays for a couple of years,
okay.
and then we kind of move on. And I think moving on is a direct reflection of the the evolution going on around us.
Mm,
If we look at now the AI model, the machine learning, the evolution in VR, the how the design is becoming so experiential now. It's more engaging. It's
mhm.
more intuitive. It's actually filling in these spaces between. That's what I use the word, the intersection of art and design led, which I'm
Yeah.
passionate about. And I think, to me, how I'm envisioning or I'm looking at the evolution, these terms is eventually going to recognize by the industry. The hybridity is
Right.
eventually going to be recognized.
Yes. So two things that I just want to say, and then we'll wrap up. I do believe that at some point, whatever became hybridized becomes normalized. It's sort of a flare in focus. And then the normalized thing can go combine with something else, and that becomes hybrid again. So I think there is that sort of wave and divergence, convergence. But what I'm also hearing you say is hybrid as skills versus hybrid as identity. And when I hear some of the work you're making, it's at the intersection of doing these things, like certain kinds of processes and techniques. But then we've also talked about the nature of your personality, and that's why, as a professional, you are this hybrid artist, because there's a level of just who you are that is hybrid in nature. So, as a final thought, do you have anything to say on the skills versus the hybrid identity sides?
Well, let me put it this way. I think passion we can learn, but purpose is we
Mhm.
have to find. And I would put that in that way. I think, to me, yes, potentially you can you can find time and you can develop those skills to be in that space which is hybrid.
Mhm.
But then to make it really sustainable and consistent, we need to find a purpose. And because the purpose drive the energy, it's not the skill drive the energy, in my opinion. So yes, it's doable, it's possible, but the question is, how far you want to go with it, right? It's, what is the end goal? What
Yes.
is the purpose? What is you're trying to do with it for your life and for the life around you?
Mm.
So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
It was amazing. I use a three-legged stool to define what work is, and it's passion, purpose, and identity is the third leg. So you just kind of mapped that organically. People need to know what they love to do, the passion, why they do what they do, the purpose. But the identity is, who are you when you're doing those things? What do you call yourself? And I think I am trying to understand in conversations the difference of a hybrid skill versus a hybrid professional identity. And you just added some new color for me. So I want to stop there and thank you so much. And Mafalda is watching us. So I have to give a shout out to Mafalda. We know her from Clubhouse too. So we've got a great crew here today. Faisal, if people want to follow up with you and learn more about you, tell us where they can find you.
well, they can find me on my uh, website, faisalanwar.ca. And it's so funny, I have 4 more websites which talks about my different work too, but this is a good one.
Okay.
And they can also find on my Instagram account, Faisal Anwar Studio. And yeah, thanks again for your time. It was an amazing sort of conversation.
Oh, Faisal, I could have gone for hours with you. You just have so many rich ways of explaining hybridity. I really appreciate your time. And if anybody's interested in learning more about hybrid professionals or being more than your job title, go to morethanmytitle.com. I've got the book and many resources. And Faisal, thank you and farewell until next time. Bye,
Thank you so
everybody.
much. Thank you so much again. I appreciate it.